Winter is coming, and it's time to honor the dead. I did my list for the best 10 characters still alive. Now it's time for my list of the 10 best characters currently deceased. It should go without saying, but I'll say it anyway. Spoiler warning if you are not caught up through the end of Season 4 on Game of Thrones, but if you are, welcome. And starting at number 10, Locke. You know, I can't quite pin exactly what it is about this character that I liked, but it was just the right balance of this scuzzy mercenary sense to him. Without him being so skeevy that you just didn't like having him around, he had just the right amount of fun to him, just sort of enjoyment that he took out of what he was doing. I think a lot of it just comes down to the fact that he was, not only did he chop off Jaime Lannister's hand, but he messed with him before he did it. I think that was kind of what made him a fun character that I enjoyed in his time. Number 9, Egret. You know, there was a time not long ago I would have bet she never would have come within 100 miles of a top 10 list of any kind for Game of Thrones with me. But you know what? With the way that things eventually paid out with her at the end, yeah, she deserves some recognition. What I really like about her was that they really committed to her turning on Jon Snow when he went back to the Crows and went back to the Night's Watch. The fact that she shot him in the back repeatedly with arrows and then was still prepared to kill him. I mean, yes, moment of hesitation at the end, but that was just enough. If they had actually both put their weapons down and had an embrace, you know what, she would have been way off this list again. But they closed her out at just the right moment where you get that little sense of, oh yeah, she kind of wishes this wasn't going on, but doesn't matter, now you did. Number 8, Robb Stark. Robb Stark did grow on me over time. When the show first started, I had a real bitch of a time distinguishing between Theon Greyjoy, Robb Stark, Jon Stark. It was kind of a wash for a while there. But to see Robb start to step up, especially just at the end of Season 1 when he became the King of the North, just to see him rise to the occasion and take control, and to have that sort of royalty, that regal kingliness to him. He really did have that as a general quality, and that's a hard thing to find. But he had it, and he sold it, and you could believe that people would want to follow him. And of course, dying in one of the most infamous moments in this entire story thus far, well, yeah, that's a hell of an exit. Number 7, Catelyn Stark. I know for a lot of people, Catelyn kind of bugs them. They find her troublesome in that she just causes a lot of problems because she's driven so much by her devotion to her family rather than looking at the big picture. And I get where those complaints come from, but it's just so true to a devoted mother and wife that I think it really speaks to the strength of her character. Just the lengths that she's willing to go to for what she genuinely feels is the best for her family and what is most likely to keep the members of her family alive. And a bit like Robb, she has that certain sense of inherent authority to her that really helps sell the character a bit more. And again, also like Robb, heck of a way to leave the show. Number 6, Maester Lannister. This is really just the strength of the performance because the character is frankly, it's a generic elderly mentor character. They're a dime a dozen in any kind of fantasy story, well, any kind of story at all, really. Older, wise, worldly mentor character. I mean, these guys are everywhere. There's nothing unique about the concept of this character, but he's just so warm and yet so well studied and so knowledgeable and wonderfully affectionate in a very subtle way. Not overtly, but you really do feel his affection and his devotion for the Stark family right from the beginning. And he was a character who I was very sorry to see go. I think that killing him at the point that he did was the right thing to do. It didn't make sense to keep him around, but I was really sorry to see him go. He was one of those characters that when he died, I just kind of went, oh no, all right. Number 5, the Hound. Admittedly, I'm taking a slight leap of faith actually putting him on this list because we did not see him die, but I'm going on the track record of this show, which is that there's no realistic way for him to get out of the situation he was in, and he was left to die. It's possible that there's some way that he's going to turn out to be alive, but that would be a pretty big stretch, and this show doesn't really deal in those kinds of big stretches and leaps to keep characters alive, so I operate on the assumption that he's dead. If you have read the books, if you know otherwise, please don't tell me. But in any case, what a terrific damaged character. I mean, this show just does damaged really, really well. And the Hound is an excellent example. Starting out as just sort of the generic, scarred badass. Although, even in that first season, you got this certain sense of very personal pain behind him. There was a quality to the performance that was a certain kind of melancholy almost. That the only reason he was doing the things that he did is because it's all he can do and he's so good at it. But then he really came into his own when he was paired with Arya and he's trying to figure out what to do with her that will get him the best advantage, and it just doesn't work out. But the way that the two of them actually started sort of bonding, but yet it never developed to the point that she was gonna do more than just leave him to die. And of course, you want to talk about great finishes. Him and Brienne of Tarth, that fight was incredible. And what a way to go down. Number 4, Tywin Lannister. You want to talk about ways to go down? Probably the most embarrassing one that we've seen on this show, but you know what? He earned those crossbow bolts, boy, did he ever. You know, I've mentioned about some of these characters, just the sense of authority you have to them. This guy not only had a sense of authority, he had a sense of menace to him. And not necessarily a physical menace, like he was going to personally bash your head in, but you just felt from his very first scene, his very first time talking to anybody, and if you don't remember, it was him laying the verbal smackdown on his son, the son he liked at that, and just how commanding the guy is. I mean, you do not question, this is a man in complete and total control of his immediate surroundings and the situation going on. He knows what's what, and he knows how to get all the pieces moved exactly where he wants them to be. And yet, despite this very sort of arch construction, he still felt very human, and you did get bits of emotion and bits of humanity out of him as the thing went along. Really a strength of Charles Dance's performance. Number 3, Oberyn Martell. We'll get to how he ended up in a minute, but man, pure charm. The instant he showed up, he kind of has that Inigo Montoya flavor to him from The Princess Bride. I'm not just saying that because of the accent. He has that swagger, that charm, but that obsessive need for revenge at the same time. Like, that's a hell of a combination, and it works terrifically here. I mean, the guy just oozes charm and appeal and sex, but then you see him start to talk about his desire for revenge against the Lannisters and against the Mountain. You're like, oh, okay, this guy is not all about pleasure. He is about some very serious stuff too. And then of course, we can't talk about Oberyn without talking about that fight and the way he died. Oh my God. I mean, that death just hurt to watch. It hurt because it was cruel. And I mean cruel in every sense. Cruel to the character, cruel to the audience, and just a horrible, horrible way to die. Blah. Number 2, Khal Drogo. Boy, you want to talk about a character who has left such a lasting impact on the show, but you know what? He was not around for very long. But man, intimidation factor, he just was so huge and so powerful, just the way he'd sit and just sort of look at somebody. You get that look in his eye and you just think, somebody's gonna die. And yet, he had that tender side, and he had that love and devotion that he showed Daenerys. I mean, you really bought that she fell in love with him, which is crazy, because she was sold to him basically as a sex slave, but she brings out that softness and that side to him without him losing his edge at the same time. And that scene especially, when he's going around thumping his chest and he's ranting and raving about how his son's gonna be the stallion that mounts the world. I mean, that just amazing stuff, and it's just burned in my memory so strong, even though it was so far back at this point. I mean, that's the sign of a strong character, somebody who leaves that kind of an impression long after they're gone. And speaking of, that brings us to number 1, Ned Stark. You know, for anyone who didn't read the books and didn't know going in, the unexpected death and the wake-up call to end all wake-up calls when it came to this show. When Ned died, suddenly you realize, oh wow, I had no idea what I was in for. As I've mentioned over time, I've had a whole ton of this show spoiled for me. Death of Ned Stark was included, but I had friends who watched it who it wasn't spoiled for them ahead of time, and they were even warned, don't get attached to anybody. They still weren't prepared for Ned to get it, like, oh, but not Ned. Yes. Ned the upright, Ned the honorable, Ned the guy who's gonna do what is most right, the most objectively right thing and he's gonna get his head chopped off for his trouble. I mean, Ned in that first season really was a beacon. He was a pillar, and for the show just to take a sledgehammer and wreck that pillar and not just come collapsing down as a result, man, that shows you how strong this show is as a whole. But he was a pillar, he was a rock, he was what you could always come back to. It was like, this is the one good guy in this whole damnable world. Well, he was, for as long as he lasted. And he was wonderful, and he was warm, and he was devoted to his family, but he held on to his honor, and you couldn't help but just feel for the guy, right up to the point where the sword detached his head from the rest of him. So that's my list for the top 10 deceased characters from Game of Thrones. Who is your favorite dead character on this show? There's quite a few to choose from, so whoever it is, leave something down in the comments and let's talk about it. Until next time, this council is adjourned.